Maybe you have a student who is struggling with letter A formation, and something that I often see is something that looks more like this. And that is an, not a proper letter A formation, and what we want to see is something like this. This is a common error I see in students all the way from our brand new early writers all the way through. At my school, we have sixth graders, and so I've seen some sixth graders still doing this. So how do we get them from here to here? It can be a challenge once that muscle memory sets in to get them here, but it can be doable. So what is the key to this, getting this really nice letter A shape? The key, there's a couple keys. The first one is always starting at the top. In other videos, I'm going to get into that too, of why it's so important to always start at the top. There are several reasons that starting at the top really helps our letter formation, the speed that a person can write by starting at the top is really going to benefit them. And there's some other reasons too. The second key is, for this letter A, is starting with the C shape. If you start at the top, you get this nice C shape, as opposed to here with a looped around. That's not starting with a C. So start at the top, this nice letter C shape, little line up, trace it down, little curve. Start at the top, magic C, little line up, trace it down, curve. If students can get this magic C down, when it's always starting at the top, little line up, trace it down, curve, with that magic C, that's going to unlock the key to a handful of other letters as well. And it's going to improve their handwriting with several other tricky letters that I'll get into in another video. So for this letter A again, magic C, little line up, trace it down, and curve. Maybe they want to get a slant in. Well, slant that C, little line up, trace it down, and curve. When practicing handwriting, there's some things that I've seen that are put out there. Super common would be the dots, following dots to help children with their letter formation. And it's these dots that is one of the contributing factors to the reason children have begun doing this type of formation, is they were maybe given worksheets like this or workbooks, and they just came up with their own plan on how to follow those dots. And that's what made sense to a lot of them. Another thing that I see with these connect the dots plans is some children get really rigid in that, and they just literally are watching and connecting each and every dot, and they don't develop that fluid motion. And we're talking about our real early learners there. When I was teaching kindergarten, some of them were so used to connecting the dots that when I was teaching them and we were trying to move on to other letters and stuff, and I wasn't using any dots, some of them would start to write the dots first. They felt like they needed those before they even would write the letter. I'm like, no, quit putting any dots on your paper at all. We're just going to write the letter without dots. Some of those kiddos, I had to give them one dot. Okay, that's your starting dot. That's where I want you to start. Magic C, little line up, trace it down, and curve. Maybe that's something that could help your child, your struggling writer. Maybe they need just that little beginning dot. Magic C, little line up, trace it down, and curve. What happens also with these other types of letter practice worksheets or workbooks is it has a couple perfect examples. Maybe there's your couple perfect examples. The child could trace those. And then it maybe backs off a little bit with the support, and it has the dots. And so they might connect dots. They may connect the dots incorrectly. And then they're given a whole line to continue to fill on their own. And we see in the beginning they look all right. And then maybe they start to shrink, or they start to float, or maybe they don't connect them here anymore, or they stay really open. Sometimes this happens, and or they're like, oh, whoops, that's too open. They come, now we've got 2 strokes here instead of that nice 1 stroke A. And then muscle memory comes along and gets them, and they're like, I'm just going to get done. And muscle memory takes over, and they just come back to where they had started. Oh, why does that happen? I'll get to that in a minute on why that happens. When I was creating my own worksheets for kindergarten, when I was a kindergarten teacher, this is what I was creating for my students. I wrote usually 2 lines of this, maybe 3, but it's usually just 2 lines of perfect examples with space for them to write their own. So what they could do is trace my perfect example and then write their own. Trace my perfect example, write their own. Maybe they didn't really feel like they needed to trace anymore, but they could write their own. Each time they're writing their own, they're looking at a perfect example. Over here, what they were doing is they're looking back at the previous letter, and they're no longer looking at perfect example, which is why the letters degrade as they get further along. The majority of the time when I've used this approach, their letters continue to stay really nice. And at the end, I'd have the students, okay, look through there and find your very best one and circle the one that you think looks the best. Now I'd tell them, you can't circle one of mine, of course, but you find yours that you think you did the very best at, and you made sure you started at the top and started with that nice magic C and ended with the little tail. And they're able to identify their very best. Even when I was teaching cursive to my 4th graders, I'd have them find and circle their very best letter that we had been practicing.